You notice the breath at the nostrils, or you may notice it in the back of the throat, or you may notice it at the chest, or perhaps in the lower part of the abdomen, or perhaps you notice the belly expanding as you breathe in and contracting as you breathe out. Wherever the breath is most noticeable for you, just letting your attention rest here, forcing it here, just letting it rest here in the way that your body is resting on the chair or bed or the floor. And just exploring the sensations of the breath as it comes in, goes out of the body. Maybe cool, may feel scratchy, the chest or the abdomen may feel full as you breathe in. Perhaps the breaths are a bit short and shallow, or perhaps they're deep and long. Whatever you experience, just letting that be your experience. Trying to force anything, trying to do anything, trying to get anything done. Just being here in this moment. As you sit here, your mind and your body will remind you of all sorts of things. The body may complain of aches or pains. The mind may interject with reminders from earlier in the day or things you have to do, plans for tomorrow. Whenever these things happen, just gently acknowledging them, noticing that they're there, and just slowly and patiently and kindly directing your attention back to the breath. And doing this as many times as you need to. Not getting angry with yourself or frustrated. Being aware that minds wander, bodies ache. You might think to yourself, breathing in, I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I'm breathing out. Nothing more, nothing less. Just staying here with each breath, moment by moment. This breath, this moment. Noting for yourself what it feels like to be here in this moment, whatever may be arising for you. Perhaps this generates a sense of calm or peace, or perhaps you notice strain or tension or anxiety. Whatever it is that you're noticing, just allowing yourself to notice that, just allowing it to be here with you, not trying to make it go away, not fighting with it, just letting it be. Noting that in this moment, there is absolutely nothing you need to do. There's nowhere you need to be, no role you need to play. When the practice ends, if you decide it's appropriate, you can pick that baggage back up again. Fill those roles. You can be something else. You can do something else. But for this time, in this moment, you're just sitting. You're just breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. As we bring this very short meditation to a close, just taking a few last deep breaths, slowly opening your eyes when you're ready, and just gently, ever so kindly coming back, perhaps allowing yourself to roll your shoulders, roll the neck, shift your body, whatever you need to do to bring yourself back into the moment, into the room. Okay. So that was just a very, very brief introduction to just breath-based practice. And as I mentioned, the idea really is just noticing the flow of the breath in and out of the body. And um, many people that I talk to about meditation often tell me that they're not good meditators or that they can't do it. And a big part of this, I think, stems from the idea that there is something you're supposed to be doing when you're meditating. Um, a lot of people say that, I just can't, I get too distracted. I can't clear my mind of thoughts. I can't focus on the breath. The breath is uncomfortable. Um, there's not really anything you're meant to be doing. The mind wanders. The experience for most people is not necessarily a relaxing one. It's not necessarily always pleasant. Um, the mind carries you away. Sometimes the body aches. Um, Sometimes the breath is short and shallow. Sometimes the breath is long and deep. Um, the point is really just to be with whatever is, um, and just let it come and go. And in that coming and going, you can potentially develop an awareness that everything comes and goes. Nothing lasts forever. And in doing that, it sort of makes it easier to recognize that because nothing will last forever, nothing bad can be here permanently, and simultaneously nothing sort of good can be here permanently either. And so really we just kind of have to find a way to enjoy the good while it's here and to endure the bad while it's here. Of course, there's a lot more to that, and I'll sort of unpack a little bit of that today, but just to kind of give you a taste of that. If you do have questions about things that came up during that practice for you, or other things you'd like to let me know, I'm very happy to kind of take questions in the chat on the fly, or you can hold them a little bit later on. So let's just talk about what's going on. Let's talk about sort of the situation we find ourselves in. So, I titled the slide "The Year That Lasted a Century," or sometimes, I've heard the day that felt like a year, or it sort of seems like the situation we find ourselves in just keeps going. When it first kind of rolled out, I know everybody sort of felt like, okay, it's just 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and kind of life will go back to normal. And particularly here in Melbourne, the long lockdown, I think it was just like, okay, we just have to make it through. And then kind of additional lockdowns have been happening, and there's currently the threat of another lockdown, of which I'm sure people are very acutely aware and concerned. And the context is one that just really is very challenging. There's sort of this constant sense of uncertainty. It's very difficult to plan day by day, week by week. It's very hard to think about where we're going to be a month from now. It's very hard to think about, will we be allowed to travel? Will we be at home? Will we be back in work? And so that proves really challenging. Many of the things that we were doing day to day a year and a half ago are not the things, or at least not the same way of doing things now. And so there's just a huge amount of change, and there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and that's incredibly challenging, even in the best of times. So really, I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I think it's important to acknowledge that uncertainty is hard, and not knowing what's coming is challenging. And I think that's sort of a critical thing for all of us to do in this context, is just to recognize that, um, as we await kind of news of whatever's next, whether the vaccine rollout will work, whether we're going to be placed into another lockdown, that it takes a toll on all of us. and recognizing that toll and being aware of that. And maybe as you were sitting, you noticed tension in your body, or perhaps you noticed incredible fatigue, or perhaps you began to feel sleepy. One of the most important things in the context of sort of using a practice like mindfulness or meditation is becoming more aware of what it is that you actually need. And the practice is not necessarily meant to fix everything, at least not as I understand it. It's meant to help you become more aware of the things that you are experiencing. And so it may alert you to the fact that you need more sleep, or you need to be a little bit easier on yourself, or you need some time off of work, or whatever it is. And so, if you find yourself trying and you start falling asleep, that's fine. Maybe have a nap. If you find your body aching, then, it'd be better for you to go and have a bath. That's great. Go do that. A lot of this is about being gentle and taking care of yourself. And ultimately, that's the goal. It's not necessarily, there's a number of experiences across the board, emotional, physical, and sort of, related to work, that many people are experiencing. So, there's a lot of emotional symptoms. Many people are experiencing increased levels of anxiety, depression, hopelessness, helplessness, feeling more irritable, feeling more nervous. Emotions feel more potent. People are feeling fatigued, body aches, headaches. Across the board, there are lots of experiences that people are having, and many of these look a lot like other physical illnesses or other mental illnesses. And certainly if those things kind of are already there, I think for many people, COVID has made them worse. As we sort of have had to deal with more uncertainty, as we've had to deal with constantly changing conditions, it's exacerbated these things. So what do you do about that? I guess critically, I think if you do have if you do have any of these symptoms, if you have any underlying issues, one critical thing is sort of to make sure that you're actually getting help for them. Meditation and other things are not necessarily a substitute for critical care. If you have physical conditions, you should make sure you're getting those looked after and treated. Now, meditation and things like that can help. It may be something that could augment it, but it's not necessarily for everyone, and it's not necessarily going to fix everything. And that's really important to know. So before I go further into that, what are some practical things that you can do? So I guess, what do you do when you don't know what to do? And I guess that I certainly have had this experience many times myself, in the last, I don't know, year and a half plus, that, it can often feel incredibly overwhelming. We don't really know what's happening day to day. I'm imagining many people that are participating today, particularly if you have children, are constantly finding, there's some chaos in the background, which is just the nature of life, as it were, the uncertainty of life. That's sort of, if you have children, sort of finding that, it seems like, if someone just mentioned we may be going into a snap lockdown as of tonight, so, then there's this sort of sudden adjustment shifting. Oh my God, tomorrow, not only do I have to be doing my job from home, but I also have to homeschool, if that's the case, right? Or I've got a million other things to do. So how do you do that? What do you do first? I guess one thing that I think I found really helpful is just that, and this is attributable to the fiction author Nora Roberts, of all people, that has made a comment about juggling. And she sort of, so she was asked at an event about sort of what she does in terms of work-life balance. And, she says, well, essentially it's like juggling. And the trick, or the reality sort of in juggling, is, some of the balls you're juggling are plastic, and some of the balls you're juggling are glass. And the critical thing, and I've actually, made a cartoon sort of bomb here, making it even worse, I guess. The critical thing is to know which are the glass balls. And I think the reality is that many of us are going to drop balls. Look, that's just the reality of it. We're juggling a lot at the moment. Many people are juggling really a lot. And, as things constantly change, more is getting added. So more balls are getting thrown in. So the key really is to know what balls can you not drop, and to come to a way that you can allow yourself permission to drop some of the other ones. So what are those balls that can drop? What are those things that absolutely do not have to be done? The reality is that of the many things that are probably on your to-do list, many of them can wait. So let's say right now, I don't know, someone has said we're going into snap lockdown tonight. If that is the case, and you're meant to be working on some report for your boss in the next hour, I'm going to go ahead and guess, unless that report is a report that is due to the CHO, that has something really critical that has to be done literally today because it's a matter of life or death, I'm going to go ahead and guess that that can probably wait. If you're in a situation where, you're being told you have to rush to pick up your kids from school because there was some incident, well, you probably can't wait on that. And so some of it really is just giving yourself permission to drop some of the balls, because the sense of like we constantly have to keep these balls in the air, and not being able to differentiate between which balls are important and which balls aren't, or which balls essentially at the end of the day are going to do the most damage to us and our lives and those around us is really difficult. So if we treat them all as being equally important, which they really aren't, then it makes our life way harder than it needs to be. So I guess with that, some really practical tips. So what are some things you can do? And I guess I've already alluded to one of them, which is honestly, you have to give yourself a break. And I know this is a lot easier said than done. But I think in the context of, dealing with uncertainty, dealing with stress, dealing with constantly changing circumstances, you're going to face tough times. You're going to face times where, the unexpected happened. I mean, if I've learned anything in the past year and a half, it's that the unexpected has happened more often than what I would like to admit. And, when you feel just particularly overwhelmed, if you're able, give yourself a break. Now, what does that break look like? It may be that you take a nap. Rather than sort of sitting through the seminar. It may be that, rather than writing up that report, you basically say, I just need an hour, and you go lie down. Maybe you can't do that. Maybe you have kids, or maybe you've got people that you need to look after. Well, maybe you can go for a walk. Or as I said, maybe another alternative is just to go, look, I know I said I'd have this to you by 5 p.m. today, but I just can't. Unfortunately, my small child is sick. My partner is sick, and the dog needs a walk, and I haven't done grocery shopping, and I'm out of toilet paper, and there's going to be a run on toilet paper. I'm sorry, it's going to have to wait till tomorrow. The reality is we often anticipate the worst, and we often think, oh my God, they're going to be so pissed off if I don't get this to him, and rarely does it actually ever happen that way. Usually people are pretty understanding. Now, I'm not promising they always will be, but look, at the end of the day, if they're not understanding, then that tells you something as well. So other things that you can do, I think, is actually try to assess how you're feeling, and what's going on. And I know this should probably be obvious, but I think the reality in a lot of this stuff is it is really obvious, but we don't always do it. So give your feelings a label, try to identify how it is that you're actually feeling. That this model here that I've got on the screen is called the affective circumplex. And I think it's quite helpful to use because it's got on a range here across the middle of unpleasant to pleasant experiences. And then, across the vertical part here, it's got activation and deactivation. And so emotions can have different components. So they can feel bad or they can feel good. They can feel sort of arousing or activating, or they can feel deactivating or calming. And it can be really helpful to know, well, what is this emotion that I'm dealing with? Is it frustration? Is it agitation? Is it irritation? Is it feeling really tired? Is it feeling bored? Am I depressed, or do I just need a nap? Maybe you need something to eat. Maybe you're feeling hangry. So I think it's often quite helpful for us just to explore, well, what is it that I'm actually feeling? And that insight can sometimes help us to figure out what it is that we need to do to kind of take care of or look after ourselves. Another thing you can do is check in on your thoughts. So, obviously, I'd imagine many of you already know this, but what are you telling yourself? What are the kinds of things that you're saying to yourself that are potentially influencing the way that you feel? So do you hear yourself saying in your head, oh, I can't believe I didn't get that done on time, or, I can't believe that we're going into yet another lockdown. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't think those things. I'm not saying that you can stop yourself from thinking those things. It's not necessarily about that. It's about recognizing that those things are happening. And The practice kind of meditation is not necessarily stopping thoughts or clearing the mind of thoughts. It's about how you decide to react to them. So as those thoughts come in, as you have feelings, you go, okay, there's a feeling, there's a thought. It's not truth, it's not fact. I don't necessarily need to do anything about it. And one of the wonderful things about mindfulness meditation practice is that as you're sitting, if you set yourself up to sit for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you sit for that period of time and no longer. And what you can do, or what you kind of learn experientially in that context, is that whatever that thought was, however important may seem at minute 2 of a 20-minute meditation, that you go and reply to an email, the house is probably not going to fall down around you if you don't do it. It can wait until the end of the period. And there's something that kind of connects in us. I've certainly had this experience. Many with whom I've worked have had this experience. There's something that just you need to learn by yourself in your experience when that kind of connects. When you go, oh yeah, I can reply to that email when I'm done with this. And that kind of goes into making yourself and your well-being a priority. Now, what do you do when you've got kids screaming and people shouting and things to attend to immediately? Well, I mean, look, that's a bit more challenging. To the extent that you can, incorporate what's going on around you into your practice. To the extent that you're able, the noises, the distractions, the things that are happening, they're all grist for the mill. They're all things that you can use in the context of your practice. Now, that's very different if the person that's coming to interrupt you is a sick child, or is a partner that has cut themselves and needs help. Obviously you're going to need to attend to that. And so as you think about setting up time for yourself, the best thing you can do is try to actually find time where you'll actually have time, where you actually be by yourself and you're unlikely to be interrupted. So, put your phone on mute or flight mode. If you have a partner who can mind the kids for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, do it. If you need to go for, if you need to literally leave the house in order to have that time, do that. Go for a walk. You don't have to sit to meditate. There's other ways of doing this. But I think a big part is to actually figure out ways to integrate distractions into what you're doing. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the most peaceful, pleasant experience you've had. I often sit here in this room. You can probably see the cage behind me. I have a large Labrador, and sometimes he loves to come and jump on my lap while I'm sitting and practicing. And to the best of my extent, I just do what I can to kind of acknowledge that there's a giant dog on top of me while I'm trying to sit and meditate, and essentially just continuing to focus on my breath. So it's just more kind of things to help you I guess practice, and kind of looking at it that way, that it's something that if it doesn't need my attention immediately, then it can have my attention when I'm done. I guess really important, and again, this sounds a bit cliche, but try to recognize what you can and can't control. There's a lot about the things that are going on in our lives that we just can't do anything about. If Dan Andrews decides we're going into another lockdown, we're going into another lockdown, and I can be angry about that. I can rail against that. I can be frustrated about it. But and all of that is fine. None of that is to say that you shouldn't feel frustrated. You shouldn't feel angry. Simultaneously, that's not to say that you might not wholeheartedly agree with it. Those things can coexist at the same time. But think about what you want to do with that feeling. Think about what you want to do with that. There's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do about it. We're not going to call them. Maybe some of you have connections to Dan or to the CHO. But what's done is done. There's not a whole lot we can do to change that scenario. So what is it that we can do kind of to prepare for whatever it is that's coming, to make it as the least unpleasant experience as it possibly can be? So what will help us get through this next period of time? And this last part sort of really is kind of dovetails with that, which is, and this is incredibly challenging, but to the extent that you can, it's really helpful to embrace uncertainty. And that's part of what, to my mind, meditation practice is all about. That there's an element of you going, I don't know what's going to happen as I sit in a chair, or as I sit on the floor, as I sit on a cushion or on my bed, moment to moment, watching the breath. I don't know what will happen. But there's a part of that experience where you can go, look, whatever happens is what's going to happen. Obviously, if there's something you need to do, if something falls on you and it's painful, of course, move and take it off. I'm not being extremist here, but if the dog bursts into the room or your child bursts into the room and there's nothing urgent. I mean, my experience has been a lot of the time that, it'll pass. Similarly, sort of, a lot of times when you sit or you lie down or whatever, you may have pain in a part of your body. That's not to say you shouldn't move, but something that's quite helpful is just to sort of explore that and spend a little bit of time before sort of reacting and going, I need to move my leg because it's falling asleep or it's painful, just exploring it a little bit longer, going a little bit past where you'd normally be comfortable and sort of going, well, what is this experience that I'm having? And just sort of decide to respond rather than react. So reacting sort of is just, we have the experience and we go, okay, I need to do something about it without even thinking. Responding is going, oh, you know what? My leg is falling asleep and it's uncomfortable. What does that feel like? What does it really feel like? Do I want to move my leg now or not? And the idea then being, when you've decided, okay, I do want to respond, this is unpleasant and unnecessary, I'll go ahead and respond. But that act of kind of just acknowledging and becoming aware of the pain that you're experiencing is to some extent embracing uncertainty. And doing that in a small way will help you in larger ways. It'll help you kind of dealing with conditions that are going on in the world that are larger and beyond your control. Now, I think this is a really useful model to think about in the context of stress. And this is a very cognitive behavioral kind of framework. This is Arnold Lazarus, I believe's model of stress. I find it quite useful in the context of the situation we find ourselves in, because it can be really useful to think about sort of where is the source of the stress? What is distressing us? So there can be an external and internal trigger, which sort of something outside or something that happens in my body can trigger an event can happen. There was a press conference telling us that something's going to change. Then there's how we feel about it. I go, oh shit, I can't possibly handle yet another one of these. And that then fuels into a series of things, a behavior response. I may decide to sort of, call it a day early. I may start to feel anxious in my body. I may start to think over and over, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this yet again? All of those things then sort of can fuel each other. And so there's ways in which you can actually intervene at each of those different steps, depending on which step is actually impacting you the greatest. So a cartoon model that I've used before, right? So, you might think of, and, I'm trying to sort of make things a little bit less focused on COVID. So maybe the pandemic we're dealing with is not the COVID pandemic, but the zombie apocalypse, and so you've been reading about it on the news. And, if your initial reaction is, I can't handle it yet again, it's likely, if that initial interpretation is, I can't handle it, then that's likely to sort of fuel or lead to subsequent actions that are likely to actually not be particularly helpful. So maybe you start stockpiling toilet paper again, or you start preparing a bunker. And that's probably going to, make you feel more anxious if you don't already. And, you might have lots of negative thoughts that this is never going to end. And so, as you start to think about all of those things, you can start to think about, okay, well, which of these sort of aspects are most troublesome for me? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I doing that potentially is making the situation maybe a bit worse than it needs to be? And there are ways that you can intervene in each of those level of steps, right? So, look, I'm not saying don't watch the press conferences. They're incredibly helpful, and often we want information in the context of an uncertainty. Often we seek it out because it makes us feel less uncertain, but it's probably helpful to kind of limit potentially some of the exposure you have. Watching certain news channels where all they do is talk about the awful situation spiraling out of control, that might not necessarily be helpful for you. When you start to think I can't handle it, it can often be helpful just to think about, well, you don't need to necessarily get through however long it is that we're dealing with. You just have to get through today or the next hour. Break it down into sort of worthwhile units. In terms of activities, behaviors you're doing, there are adaptive things that you can do to protect yourself and your family. Rather than stockpiling, making a bunker, you just sort of can wear a mask, wash your hands, stay distance from other people. If you're feeling anxious, there are techniques, there are things that you can do to help yourself relax physically. You can have a bubble bath, you can do progressive muscle relaxation, you can do meditation, you can do yoga. If you're experiencing thoughts, you can challenge those thoughts. So, if you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to run out of food and I'm going to have to start hunting the magpies out in front of my house, you might sort of rational, reason with yourself and start thinking, okay, look, the reality is we're probably quite a bit of ways before I have to start actually hunting the magpies. And frankly, they probably don't taste very good anyway. Okay, so look, the other thing I really want to point out, and I don't mean to be dismissive by any means, but how we keep talking about these times as incredibly uncertain. And the reality is, yes, they feel really uncertain to us. And yes, they're certainly probably for many of us the most uncertain experiences and the most unpredictable time in our probably adult lives, or maybe our entire lives. Things are very different than, certainly I've ever experienced. But it's worth acknowledging that, there's a lot going on that's actually good in the world. And yes, at the moment, things are pretty difficult and tough. But this graph is showing life expectancy sort of going back to the late 1700s. And, generally speaking, life was a lot more uncertain in the not too distant past. You could have died from, stepping on a rusty nail on the way home. So, there are elements of what we're experiencing that are unpleasant and uncertain and hard to manage. But sometimes sort of trying to have some perspective on that can be helpful, and sometimes recognizing that we're actually pretty fortunate. I'm sure many of you have family and colleagues that sort of are overseas in other countries that haven't had such great experiences with the pandemic. And so for as many failings or frustrations as there have been with the way that things have been handled here in Australia, there's always ways in which it probably could have been worse. Of course, there's ways in which, in which it could have been better as well. But thinking about sort of and recognizing that, look, it's not going to last forever. And, there's periods in time where it's been much worse than it is now. Sometimes that can be really helpful just to kind of give yourself a bit of perspective on what's happening. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the kind of a fundamental idea to sort of to meditation, and this is sort of Buddhist philosophy. And the idea here essentially is that no matter what we do, and this isn't nihilistic, but no matter how we approach life and no matter what we experience, we're going to experience pain. Bad things are going to happen. Not all the time, but bad things are going to happen. There's nothing that we can do to get rid of them or make them go away. But there's this sort of other element to it, which is that suffering is optional. So there's the stuff that happens to us, and there's what we do with it. And that's not to make light of, the terrible things that can happen in the world, but it is to say that we do have some control over how we react to those things. And so if we tell ourselves over and over again, I can't believe how awful this is. Why is this happening to me? I don't deserve this. Us kind of adding that on top of the pain that we're already experiencing or the discomfort we're already experiencing is potentially only going to exacerbate it. And I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm not saying that, the default option, sort of the response of going, this is really unreasonable, I shouldn't have to do it. That kind of thinking alternatively to that is easy. But I'm just trying to point out that, it is something that we often add on top of the raw experience of discomfort or pain. And so really the way that this has been framed then is, if we can recognize that, we've then got some work cut out for us. And so what do? Well, the first thing we can do sort of is just really to embrace life and to acknowledge that life is full of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And that, some good things are going to happen, some bad things are going to happen, and a hell of a lot of neutral things are going to happen. And in all of those things, they're going to come. So, and they're going to go. So the second part, let go of what arises, as things come, so they'll go. And so we just acknowledge that nothing is going to last forever. And, we can work to develop a recognition that it's going to come and it's going to go. And that's the ceasing part. And then finally, if we come to an awareness of all of these things, we still have work to do. There's still something further beyond that. And that's where this path comes in. And this is sort of a fundamental part of kind of how meditation has historically been structured, which is that mindfulness is not one thing that you do in and of itself. It's part of a broader set of practices in life philosophy. And the idea here is that there's wisdom, there's some insight into the nature of our problems. There's the way that we go about our lives. And you may think of this as ethical, or you may just think of this as, how you conduct yourselves day to day. And then there's kind of a way of actually addressing our problems. In a contemporary context, we may think of this as psychotherapy, but there's other traditional models. Here, it was considered mental development, and in this case, meditation was one part of that. So the wisdom is developing a more realistic awareness or view of what's actually going on. So we walk past someone on the street, we wave at them and they don't wave back. We get frustrated. We think, oh, I can't believe they ignored me. The reality, maybe they just didn't see us. And so here there's a recognition that was not complete view. We missed something. We interpreted that situation a particular way. The complete thought or complete intention, what is it that we're intending to get out of it? If there's this idea that if we plant seeds, if we try to set our intentions towards something good, even if we don't succeed, then at least we're sort of aiming in the right direction. And then thinking about how you go about your day-to-day life. What do you say, not only to others, but also to yourself? How do you act? What do you do in response to stressors? What do you do in response to other people threatening you or saying nasty things to you or saying neutral things to you that you kind of interpret as nasty? How do you go about living your life? What do you do in your life? Is that something that actually you feel good about? Is it something that is conducive to your well-being? And then finally thinking about, well, how do I actually develop my own emotional balance and my own emotional capacities? There's effort that's involved. There's mindfulness or awareness of how I'm acting from moment to moment. And there's an important sort of development of kind of introspective qualities. What's going on inside of me? What am I experiencing at any given moment? And it's, without actually practicing that and coming to develop an awareness of that, it's really hard to do anything about it. Now, another really fundamental part to this process is finding a balance in terms of how we act in the world. And in the traditional context, we'll be talking about clinging and pushing away. So I often like to use the example of a butterfly. And, a butterfly landing on your hand, some people may not like butterflies or might not like bugs, but, if you think a butterfly is quite beautiful, you may enjoy the experience of the butterfly landing on your hand. You might enjoy looking at it. It's not going to stay there forever. But if you want it to land on your hand, there's some things that you're probably going to have to do, right? So I'm thinking I have a 5.5-year-old son, and he gets really excited when the butterfly lands on him if we go to the Melbourne Zoo. And, he kind of has this sort of instinct to like grab it. And, if you cling, if you try to hold on to that butterfly, you're probably going to crush it. Similarly, sort of if you chase after the butterfly with an open hand, it's probably going to make it less likely that it actually lands on you and you can enjoy it being with you. So there's this element of sort of recognizing that holding tightly to things does not make them any more pleasant, does not make them stay. They will still go away. And maybe it actually expedites their going away. And those things that we don't like, kind of trying to push them away is also not really helpful. Or chasing after experiences that we might want is not necessarily helpful. So finding the right balance of sort of not clinging and not pushing away, that's ultimately what the sort of philosophy suggests that we need to do. Now, the one really critical thing I want to say before I allow people to ask some questions is the time to start this stuff is not during a crisis. So if you're feeling really overwhelmed right now, then essentially this could be akin to you rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right? That's not the time to start practicing something like meditation. Crisis is not the optimal time to sort of start something totally new to you. It's not a fix-all. It's not a band-aid to sort of various problems, or in fact, it may end up just being a band-aid. So the time to really start practicing this is when things are actually going well. That doesn't mean you can't use these techniques or these ideas that I've talked about today now. It doesn't mean that you couldn't try to use something like meditation now. But the point being really that these are things that you have to actually start doing regularly, because if you don't do them regularly, and if you only do them when things are going to shit, then they're way harder to do and they're less likely to be beneficial. So there's other things you can do in addition to, kind of basic breath awareness. If you also want to do just a basic practice to sort of become aware of what's going on in your body, a simple practice is a body scan. And the idea sort of is just lying down, going, say, from the top of your head to the bottom of your toes and just breathing in and breathing out and paying attention to the sensations at each and every part of your body. You can do it fast, you can do it slow. The point of this particular activity is not necessarily to become relaxed. It's not to fall asleep. In fact, John Kabat-Zinn, when he talks about it, says it's essentially falling awake. But the purpose of the activity is not to change your experience. It's just to experience whatever it is that you're experiencing. So I will end there, and I would be happy to take any questions that anyone might have about this or anything more generally.
I haven't got any questions. Have you received any through the chat function, Nicholas?
Yes, I just got one directly. It's been especially hard for staff who are expats or on temporary visas who don't have family here. The uncertainty is especially rough and nothing really seems to help. It's affected motivation, only decreases over time by the fluctuation of the situation. Look, I can definitely connect with that. Most of my family is in the United States. This is a huge challenge. We don't know when we're going to be able to see family again. We don't know when we're going to be able to travel again. We don't know when they're going to be able to travel here. I guess I would go back to this idea of, you have to kind of recognize what you can do something about and what you can't. And we can't force the borders to open. We can do those things that we can do. Getting vaccinated makes our chances of sort of being able to travel probably more likely. Can we get them here faster? Probably not. So what can we do? Well, we can try to spend time with them the best way we can. We can FaceTime, we can Skype, we can Zoom with them, we can talk about them, we can do activities that remind us of them. But that may be the only thing we can do. And so I guess there's an element of coming to recognize or accept that while it's not, while those Zooms or FaceTimes or Skypes or whatever is by no means what we'd like, it's something. We still get to connect with them. We still get to be with them, I guess, in some meaningful way, even if it's only remotely and digitally. And I guess the other thing is just to acknowledge that it's hard, just to recognize and give yourself a break when you're feeling down and sad about it, because it's sad, it's hard. I haven't seen my family in, since early 2019. And I don't know when I'll see them again. And that's a huge challenge. And I think sort of also along that line, so, focus on the sources of joy that sort of are around you in your environment to the extent that you can. That's not to say ignore what you're missing. But, if you have a pet, you have friends nearby, you have a partner, you have kids, try to really focus, I think, on that to the extent that's possible. So there's another question to basically, what would you suggest to students who have deadlines that can't be pushed? Well, firstly, I would question that with respect to, whether or not the deadlines can be pushed. My experience as an academic has been that many instructors have been very understanding of situations and have been very willing to kind of grant additional extensions in these contexts. Many sort of universities, things like that, have been much more generous with, leave times and things like that. I guess the other thing is sort of that, if one deadline can't be changed, can another one? So, is it possible if you really just don't have the energy and effort to do all the things that you're meant to do, is it possible that you can not do something else? Can you take a bit of time off from work or from volunteering or whatever other commitments perhaps that are also maybe a bit draining to you? Or maybe you have multiple assignments doing at once. And, if possible, maybe you can move a different one of them to give you more time on the one that perhaps isn't possible to move.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Questions?
Any other questions? I have one. What got you into this interest of yours in your passion for meditation and mindfulness?
Very well. It's a long story. The short version of it is that, which I think is the case for many people, is crisis. Really, I had a crisis of an existential crisis of kind of my personal upbringing and the faith in which I was raised and my plans for what I wanted to do with my life. And as a result of that, I had been exposed to mindfulness-based stress reduction when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Wisconsin. And I went back to that and thought, okay, there was something in that that was useful and valuable to me. And so I went back to that and I used that again, and I read books about it, and I found a lot in it. I found a lot of ways of sort of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, a lot of insight into myself. And I used that as a way of sort of exploring where I wanted to go with things. And I guess just my personal sort of approach to it has been that I wanted to know what the evidence behind it was, because I wanted to explore to what extent it might help others as well. And I didn't want to promote something that couldn't work for lots of people on average. I have another comment here. Why does it feel like uncertain? I hope that was a helpful answer in terms of my own motivation. So I guess I would say, just want to add one thing. It's been incredibly helpful for me, and I know a lot of people are helped by it. I always like to say, though, that it's not necessarily for everyone, and I personally don't have any issue with that. I'm not an acolyte. There are lots of ways to kind of to sort of feel better and have better experiences, and meditation is not the only way of doing that. So the other question is, well, why does it feel like uncertain times make you focus more on the negatives? It feels like a lot of effort to think positively or to do things that make you feel happy. There's a paper from a number of years back that talks about this. So uncertainty often triggers the same circuitry in the brain that anxiety does. So we often treat, particularly if we have anxious tendencies, we're very, very likely to do this, but uncertainty is often processed as threatening. And so as a result, when we don't know what's going to happen, we often focus on the worst possible thing. And the suggestion that one of the reasons that we do that is essentially we're trying to prepare. We're trying to prepare for how we're going to have to deal with the worst thing that can happen. So you're right. I mean, thinking positively is a real challenge. I would say, I think the goal, or at least the way that I think about it, the goal is not necessarily to try to force yourself to think positively, because I don't think that that's helpful. If you try to force yourself to think positively, a lot of times it just makes the negative all the more obvious. I think a better thing to do sort of is try to recognize when you're kind of overly focusing on the negative, and just sort of try to recognize that you are really kind of emphasizing the negative, and perhaps exploring that, and maybe not trying to shift yourself to the positive, but shifting yourself to the neutral. Hopefully that helps to answer that question.
Thank you very much. I think we're almost out of time. I can't thank you enough. This has been really interesting. We've got some good feedback. So thank you so much, Nicholas, for your time.
Absolutely.
And yeah, do you want to say anything about the Centre for Contemplative Studies?
Just that, look, I think if anything that we talked about today sort of is of interest, I mean, this is basically a lot of what the center is going to be about. We'll have lots of people coming from different traditions, from different academic backgrounds, from different disciplines, from different walks of life to talk about practices in different forms. We'll be offering lots of different guided practices. So if this is at all of interest in you, whether from a research perspective, an academic perspective, or a personal perspective, please do, kind of watch the space and watch to see what it is that we're going to be introducing, and hopefully come and participate in some of the things that we put on.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Eat, Move, Relax subcommittee for organizing this. And I really appreciate everybody's time, and especially Nicholas's. So thank you so much, everyone. And have yourself a wonderful day as we proceed into the uncertainty.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. I'll just put everybody but you in.